Imagine a single family so powerful they financed popes, crowned queens, built the Renaissance and transformed a city into the cradle of modern culture. The Medici were more than bankers. They were kingmakers, visionaries and master strategists who ruled Florence not with swords, but with gold and genius. From humble merchants to Europe's most influential dynasty, their story is filled with dazzling art, political intrigue, forbidden alliances and ultimate downfall. This is the rise and fall of the Medici, a legacy etched into the heart of history. The Medici family stands as one of the most influential dynasties in European history, with a legacy that spans centuries and leaves a deep imprint on art, politics, finance and religion. Emerging from humble beginnings in the Mugello region of Tuscany, the Medici transformed themselves into the de facto rulers of Florence and later the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, all while shaping the contours of the Renaissance and helping birth the modern world. Their story is not just one of personal ambition and power, but also of cultural patronage, political innovation, and ultimately, decline. Understanding the Medici is essential for grasping how a single family could wield such expansive and multifaceted influence over Western civilization. The rise of the Medici began in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, at a time when Florence was both politically fragmented and economically vibrant. Giovanni de Medici laid the foundation for the family's success through the establishment of the Medici Bank, which became one of the most prosperous and respected financial institutions in Europe. Unlike other banking dynasties that often sought overt political power, Giovanni maintained a relatively low profile, preferring to accumulate influence quietly by fostering strategic relationships and supporting key institutions. His financial acumen enabled the Medici to become indispensable to both the commercial and political apparatus of Florence. The momentum continued under his son, Cosimo de Medici, often referred to as Cosimo the Elder. With a deft combination of wealth, political shrewdness and popular support, Cosimo emerged as the unchallenged power behind the scenes of the Florentine Republic. Though Florence was nominally a republic, Cosimo managed to manipulate its institutions to serve Medici interests, thereby crafting an oligarchic regime under the guise of republicanism. His ability to control public office through patronage, alliances and financial influence enabled the family to stabilize its position at the top of Florentine society. It was under Lorenzo de Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, that the family's influence reached its cultural zenith. A scholar, poet and statesman, Lorenzo embodied the ideals of the Renaissance prince. His court became a hub for artists, philosophers and intellectuals, including figures like Botticelli, Michelangelo and Pico della Mirandola. Lorenzo's political strategies maintained peace among the fractious Italian states for much of his rule, allowing for an unprecedented flourishing of the arts and humanities in Florence. During this time, the Medici became synonymous with the Renaissance itself, using their wealth not only to consolidate power but also to cultivate beauty, knowledge, and innovation. Yet even in this golden era, the seeds of decline were sown. The Medici Bank began to falter due to poor management, risky loans, and the growing complexity of European finance. Additionally, Lorenzo's lavish spending and reliance on cultural rather than economic investments began to strain the family's resources. Following Lorenzo's death, the Medici struggled to maintain their grip on power. His son, Piero the Unfortunate, was ill-equipped to navigate the turbulent political landscape and was eventually forced into exile by an invading French army. For a time, Florence expelled the Medici and attempted to revive its republican ideals under the stern leadership of Girolamo Savonarola. Exile did not mean the end of Medici influence, however. Through strategic marriages and ecclesiastical advancement, the family reasserted itself in a different arena, the papacy. Giovanni de Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, ascended to the papacy as Pope Leo X. His reign marked a shift in the Medici strategy from local Florentine dominance to broader influence over Christendom. As Pope, Leo X continued the Medici tradition of patronage, commissioning works by Raphael and others, and initiating the construction of St. Peter's Basilica. His excesses and political maneuvering, however, contributed to the growing discontent that sparked the Protestant Reformation. Another Medici Pope, Clement VII, faced even more turbulent times. His inability to manage the political tensions between the Holy Roman Empire and France led to the sack of Rome in 1527, a catastrophic event that weakened both papal authority and the Medici's prestige. Nevertheless, the family managed to return to Florence and eventually transitioned from behind-the-scenes rulers to formal monarchs. In 1537, Cosimo I de' Medici became Duke of Florence and later Grand Duke of Tuscany, initiating a new era of centralized rule and dynastic continuity. Cosimo I and his successors brought order and relative prosperity to Tuscany, but the character of Medici rule changed. The early spirit of humanism and civic engagement gave way to a more autocratic and ceremonial court culture. Although the Medici continued to sponsor scientists like Galileo and artists such as Caravaggio, their role had shifted from revolutionary patrons of the Renaissance to traditional aristocrats clinging to power. The Medici Duchy persisted through successive generations, gradually losing influence and prestige. Medici's story are marked by stagnation and symbolic gestures aimed at preserving their legacy. John Gaston de Medici, the last male heir, died without issue in 1737. The family's extinction was softened by the efforts of Anna Maria Luisa de Medici, who ensured that the vast Medici art collections and architectural treasures would remain in Florence for public benefit. Her family pact effectively turned Florence into a museum of Medici achievement and foresight, preserving their cultural impact long after their political relevance had faded. The Medici story resonates not simply because of its drama and grandeur, but because it encapsulates the complexity of Renaissance power. They were bankers who became kings, patrons who shaped the canon of Western art, and politicians who blurred the lines between despotism and republicanism. Their legacy lives on in the churches, palaces, and galleries of Florence, in the institutional memory of the Vatican, and in the DNA of modern finance and politics. By fusing wealth, vision, and strategy, the Medici helped forge the path from the medieval world to the modern age, an enduring example of how cultural and political ambition can change the course of history. The story of the Medici family begins long before they became the lords of Florence and the patrons of the Renaissance. Their origins trace back to the Mugello Valley, a rugged region northeast of Florence. During the 13th century, this rural area was home to a number of small landowning families, among them the Medici. Though they were not of noble blood, the Medici had land, modest wealth, and ambitions that would, over generations, push them to the very center of European power. The early history of the family is clouded by the mists of time, but some figures stand out. Giambuono de' Medici appears in historical records in the late 1200s as a minor merchant or money changer in Florence. His descendants began to migrate from the countryside into the city, where greater opportunities awaited those willing to take risks. During this period, Florence was becoming one of the most prosperous cities in Europe, its economy driven by textile manufacturing, international trade, and a dynamic banking sector. The Medici saw a chance to rise through these avenues. By the early 1300s, the family was beginning to make a name for itself in commerce and finance. One early Medici, Salvestro de' Medici, gained some notoriety in the mid-14th century. He participated in Florence's complex political struggles, aligning with the popular faction against the powerful noble families. Though his efforts were not fully successful and his political career ended in exile, Salvestro's involvement in civic affairs marked the beginning of the Medici's intertwining with Florentine governance. At this stage, the family was still relatively minor among Florence's elite, but their growing presence in economic and political life would lay the groundwork for future influence. To understand how the Medici would eventually rise to dominate Florence, one must consider the broader context of the city during the Middle Ages. Florence in the 13th and 14th centuries was a city marked by prosperity but also deep factionalism. The most famous of these rivalries was between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, factions that originally represented support for the papacy and the Holy Roman Emperor, respectively. These political divisions eventually fragmented into sub-factions and were often used to justify personal and family rivalries, which could erupt into violent street battles and political purges. Despite the turbulence, Florence's economic structure provided opportunities for families like the Medici. The city was governed by a complex system of guilds, which controlled trade, regulated industries, and held significant political power. Among these, the Arte della Lana wool guild, and the Arte del Cambio bankers guild, were especially powerful. These institutions formed the backbone of the Florentine economy. Wealth and political access were tied closely to guild membership and influence, making them critical platforms for social mobility. The Medici, through their early involvement in wool and banking, gained positions within these guilds, allowing them to build wealth and form valuable connections. Florence's economy, based heavily on the export of fine woolen cloth, required sophisticated financial services, including currency exchange, credit, and long-distance money transfers. The development of modern banking in this environment created fertile ground for the Medici to distinguish themselves. The person most responsible for transforming the Medici from a moderately successful merchant family into a powerful banking dynasty was Giovanni de' Medici de' Medici. Born around 1360, Giovanni was the son of Everardo de' Medici, who had modest business success but had not yet propelled the family into the ranks of Florence's elite. Giovanni, however, possessed both business acumen and a shrewd understanding of politics. He joined the Arte del Cambio and began working in banking at a young age. His early work brought him to Rome, where he managed the finances of the papal court, a position that proved to be a turning point. By developing close ties with the papacy, Giovanni secured the Medici Bank's role as a major financial institution. The church was one of the largest economic entities in Europe, and managing its money meant access to vast sums and immense influence. In 1397, Giovanni officially founded the Medici Bank in Florence. Unlike some other contemporary banks that overextended themselves, Giovanni ran his operation with caution and intelligence. He expanded gradually, establishing branches in key European cities such as Venice, Geneva, and London, but avoided reckless speculation. One of Giovanni's defining characteristics was his understated approach to power. Unlike many of his contemporaries who flaunted their wealth and sought noble titles, Giovanni kept a relatively modest public profile. He lived simply and avoided ostentatious displays of influence, preferring to work behind the scenes. This strategy allowed him to build alliances across Florence's often divided political landscape and helped insulate him from the backlash that sometimes came with overt displays of dominance. Giovanni's success in business translated into political clout. Though Florence remained a republic in theory, money played a central role in the operation of its government. Through a combination of direct contributions, favors, and discreet influence, Giovanni was able to ensure that policies aligned with Medici interests. He did not seek office himself, but supported candidates and controlled appointments, laying the groundwork for what would become the family's soft rule over Florence. His wealth also enabled him to support public works and charitable causes, reinforcing the perception of the Medici as benefactors of the city. This combination of financial success, civic generosity, and political subtlety made Giovanni one of the most respected men in Florence by the time of his death in 1429. Importantly, he passed not only wealth but also a carefully cultivated public image and a working political strategy to his sons, especially Cosimo de' Medici, who would take the family's fortunes to even greater heights. Giovanni's legacy was not just a thriving bank, but a model of how to convert economic capital into political and cultural influence. His methods, quiet alliances, careful risk management, and civic-minded generosity, became hallmarks of Medici leadership for generations. He understood that in the volatile and faction-ridden world of Florentine politics, power was best wielded subtly, and that influence could often achieve more than brute authority. In many ways, Giovanni de' Medici de' Medici was the prototype of the Renaissance man of affairs, a financier, a strategist, and a civic leader. His rise encapsulated the unique possibilities of Florence in the late Middle Ages, where economic innovation, political savvy, and urban development combined to create one of the most dynamic societies in Europe. Under his guidance, the Medici family transitioned from rural obscurity to urban prominence, from merchants to masters of money, and from supporting roles in the city's politics to center stage. His success set the stage for the Medici to become more than just wealthy bankers. With Florence as their base, the Medici would go on to influence not only the political life of their city but also the cultural trajectory of Europe itself. The wealth generated by Giovanni's ventures would fund some of the greatest artistic achievements of the Renaissance. More importantly, his approach to power, measured, indirect, and deeply intertwined with the civic fabric of Florence, would define the family's strategy for the next century. The Medici were no longer merely participants in Florence's history, they were beginning to write it. The Medici family's rise to prominence in Florence and beyond took a decisive turn with Cosimo de' Medici, the son of Giovanni de' Medici de' Medici. If Giovanni had been the architect of the family's financial empire and political base, Cosimo would become its master builder, expanding both in scope and sophistication. His life and actions transformed the Medici from successful merchants and bankers into the de facto rulers of Florence and pioneers of Renaissance patronage. In the process, he helped shape the political and cultural trajectory not only of his city but of Europe. Cosimo was born in 1389 into a world already being carefully prepared by his father. He was well educated in Latin, business, and the classics, and trained from an early age in the art of banking and diplomacy. Unlike noble families who inherited armies and castles, the Medici wielded influence through wealth, social connections, and a firm grip on the economic arteries of Florence. Cosimo's inheritance was not land or title, but the subtle power of financial control and political maneuvering, skills he would employ with unmatched effect. In 1433, Cosimo faced a dramatic political crisis. His increasing influence made him many enemies among Florence's powerful families, particularly the Albizzi, who controlled much of the city's political machinery at the time. The Albizzi, threatened by Cosimo's growing support, accused him of plotting against the state. He was arrested, tried and sentenced to exile. But even in exile, Cosimo's power remained intact. His banking network extended across Europe, and his connections in Rome, Venice, and even within Florence itself allowed him to survive politically and economically. Within a year the political tide turned. A new ruling faction recalled Cosimo to Florence, where he returned not as a humbled exile, but as the most powerful man in the city. His return marked the beginning of an era often referred to as the Medici regime, a form of soft oligarchy wrapped in the traditional structures of republican government. Florence remained a republic in name, but Cosimo was its quiet ruler. He never held an official title commensurate with his influence. Instead, he mastered the informal levers of control, the selection of public officials, manipulation of electoral mechanisms, and cultivation of loyalty through patronage and favors. Cosimo used the Medici Bank's resources to lend money to strategic allies and institutions. His funding of public projects and charitable endeavors created a strong base of support among the populace. He understood that visible generosity and civic engagement could disguise the true extent of his political dominance. One of the most important aspects of Cosimo's rule was his use of culture as both a political tool and a personal passion. His patronage of the arts and learning was not only sincere but strategically brilliant. Through the commissioning of buildings, artworks and intellectual works, Cosimo shaped the physical and intellectual landscape of Florence. One of his most significant architectural endeavors was the Church of San Lorenzo. Designed by Filippo Brunelleschi, this church became a statement of Medici power and taste. It was not only a religious site but also a family monument, eventually housing the Medici tombs. Cosimo also became a patron to some of the most important artists of his time. He supported Donatello, whose bronze statue of David was both a masterpiece of Renaissance sculpture and a symbol of Florentine independence. Fra Angelico, the Dominican friar painter, was commissioned to create frescoes in San Marco, reflecting the blend of religious devotion and artistic brilliance that characterized the Medici vision of patronage. Brunelleschi, whose architectural genius had already transformed Florence with the dome of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, was employed by Cosimo to work on various civic and religious buildings. Through these projects, Cosimo not only beautified the city but also reinforced the Medici presence in every stone and brushstroke. Beyond the visual arts, Cosimo played a crucial role in the revival of classical learning. He was deeply interested in the humanist movement, which sought to recover and study the texts and philosophies of ancient Greece and Rome. One of his most enduring contributions to intellectual history was his patronage of Marsilio Ficino, a philosopher and translator who was instrumental in the dissemination of Platonic thought in Renaissance Europe. Cosimo established the Platonic Academy of Florence, an informal gathering of scholars and thinkers who sought to synthesize Christian theology with classical philosophy. This blending of the old and the new, the sacred and the secular, became a defining feature of the Renaissance itself. Another major arena in which Cosimo exerted his influence was the Council of Florence, held in 1439. This ecumenical council was a major effort to reunite the Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic churches. Though the union ultimately failed in practice, the council had significant cultural and political ramifications. Cosimo hosted many of the visiting dignitaries and theologians, and used the event to elevate Florence's status as a global center of diplomacy and religion. The council also served as a channel for the transmission of Eastern knowledge and texts into the West, further fueling the Renaissance. At the center of all these activities was the Medici Bank, the institution that enabled so much of the family's influence. Founded by Giovanni but vastly expanded under Cosimo, the bank became one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe. It operated through a decentralized system of branches located in major cities such as London, Geneva, Bruges, Avignon, and Milan. Each branch was semi-autonomous but tied back to Florence and the Medici family. This network not only facilitated trade and finance but also extended the family's influence far beyond the confines of Tuscany. The bank innovated in several ways. It developed techniques in double-entry bookkeeping, credit analysis, and currency exchange that would influence the future of banking. The Medici Bank also managed papal finances, a crucial relationship that brought enormous prestige and security. Being the bankers of the church meant access to a steady stream of income and political favor, including opportunities to influence ecclesiastical appointments and decisions. But the bank was more than just a financial enterprise, it was a political engine. Loans to monarchs, popes, and influential nobles created dependencies and alliances. The Medici could not be ignored because they were embedded in the economic lifeblood of European politics. Their wealth allowed them to act as kingmakers and peacemakers, financing wars and treaties alike. Despite its success, the bank faced constant risks. Political instability in one region could imperil entire branches. Debts were not always repaid even by the most powerful clients. Cosimo managed these risks with caution, always balancing ambition with prudence. He avoided the ruinous speculation that brought down other banking houses of the time, such as the Bardi and Peruzzi. He kept tight control over management, appointing loyal and competent relatives and associates to key posts. Cosimo's legacy was profound. When he died in 1464, he was buried with unprecedented honors. The people of Florence referred to him as Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland. This title reflected not only the respect he commanded but also the unique position he held in the city's history. He had reshaped Florence's political structure, redefined the role of patronage, and laid the foundations for a dynasty that would endure for centuries. The model of governance he established, rule through influence rather than office, dominance concealed by public generosity, cultural leadership intertwined with political control, would be emulated by his descendants and by other powerful families across Europe. Cosimo's life illustrates how power in the Renaissance was often not about crowns or armies but about networks, money, ideas, and image. The Medici were masters of this new form of power, and Cosimo was their first great practitioner. The cultural investments he made had long-term consequences. The churches, libraries, and academies he funded continued to serve the public long after his death. The artists he supported inspired future generations, and the ideas fostered under his patronage became the intellectual foundation of the modern world. His approach to leadership, marked by strategic generosity, political shrewdness, and cultural vision, turned the Medici from mere merchants into Renaissance princes. Through Cosimo's efforts, Florence became not only a center of wealth but the beating heart of a new age in European civilization. Lorenzo de Medici, known to history as Lorenzo il Magnifico, was perhaps the most illustrious member of the Medici dynasty and a towering figure of the Italian Renaissance. Born in 1449 into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Europe, Lorenzo inherited not only immense resources but also the responsibility of sustaining the legacy of his grandfather, Cosimo de Medici. What he built during his lifetime was a vision of Florence as the artistic and intellectual capital of Europe, and what he managed to maintain was the delicate balance of political power in an Italy fragmented by rivalry and ambition. Under Lorenzo, the Medici reached the pinnacle of influence, and Florence flourished as never before. From an early age, Lorenzo was groomed to lead. His education was steeped in the humanist ideals that were shaping Renaissance thought. He studied classical literature, philosophy, Latin, Greek, and the arts under some of the finest tutors of the time. This education did more than prepare him for political leadership. It shaped his character and worldview. He developed a love for poetry, a passion for antiquity, and a deep understanding of the intellectual currents of his day. This blend of cultural sophistication and political savvy would become his hallmark. Unlike his more reserved father, Piero the Gouty, Lorenzo had a charismatic personality and a strong public presence. He was tall, athletic, and confident, with a taste for tournaments and festivals, yet he also possessed a reflective, philosophical nature. When his father died in 1469, Lorenzo assumed control of the family's affairs at the age of just 20. Though young, he quickly demonstrated his ability to manage the complex affairs of Florence and the Medici Bank, as well as the intricate web of Italian diplomacy. His rule was marked by a careful balancing act between overt control and respect for republican forms. Florence was officially a republic, but under Lorenzo it functioned more as a principality cloaked in the garments of civic freedom. He manipulated elections, controlled appointments, and ensured that key positions were filled by allies. Yet he avoided the title of prince or duke, preferring to operate within the familiar structure of Florentine governance. This allowed him to maintain the appearance of republicanism while exercising near-absolute authority. Lorenzo's most notable political achievement was his role in preserving peace on the Italian peninsula during a period when war was the natural condition of city-states. The Peace of Lodi, signed in 1454, had brought temporary stability by recognizing the territorial integrity of the major Italian powers: Florence, Milan, Venice, Naples, and the Papal States. Lorenzo worked tirelessly to uphold this peace through diplomatic alliances, marriages, and behind-the-scenes negotiations. He was instrumental in the formation and maintenance of the Italian League, a delicate equilibrium that kept the major powers in check and allowed Florence to prosper. This era of relative peace gave Florence the breathing room to become a crucible of artistic and intellectual achievement. Lorenzo himself was a poet, writing in both Latin and Tuscan, and he surrounded himself with a circle of thinkers, artists, and writers. His court became a magnet for the most brilliant minds of the time. Under his patronage, the arts flourished to an extraordinary degree. Perhaps the most iconic of Lorenzo's artistic relationships was with Sandro Botticelli, whose masterpieces like The Birth of Venus and Primavera were imbued with the Neoplatonic philosophy popularized in Lorenzo's intellectual circles. These paintings reflect the blending of mythological themes with humanist ideals, celebrating beauty, love, and harmony in ways that were both spiritual and sensual. Lorenzo also recognized the genius of a young Michelangelo Buonarroti, taking the adolescent sculptor into his household and providing him with access to the Medici gardens, which were filled with ancient Roman statuary. This early exposure to classical art and the patronage of Lorenzo had a profound impact on Michelangelo's development as one of the greatest artists of all time. In literature and philosophy, Lorenzo supported figures like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. Ficino, who translated Plato's works into Latin and developed a system of Christian Neoplatonism, was the intellectual anchor of the Platonic Academy of Florence, a semi-formal institution that Lorenzo both funded and influenced. Pico, best known for his Oration on the Dignity of Man, represented the Renaissance ideal of the limitless potential of human beings. These thinkers helped to position Florence as the center of a cultural revolution that redefined the Western intellectual tradition. Lorenzo also used marriage as a strategic tool to secure political alliances. His own marriage to Clarice Orsini, a member of a prominent Roman noble family, strengthened the Medici connection to the papacy and the Roman aristocracy. Through the marriages of his children and relatives, Lorenzo created a network of alliances that extended the Medici influence throughout Italy and even into other European courts. These alliances were not only social or ceremonial but deeply political, helping to protect Florence and the Medici interests during turbulent times. Yet despite his many successes, Lorenzo's tenure was not without crises. The most dramatic threat to his life and rule came in 1478 in the form of the Puzzi conspiracy. This plot, orchestrated by the rival Puzzi family and supported by elements within the papal curia, aimed to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during Mass at the Florence Cathedral. Giuliano was killed, but Lorenzo survived, wounded and shaken. His response was swift and ruthless. The conspirators were hunted down and executed in public, and Lorenzo took the opportunity to consolidate his power further, purging opposition and tightening his grip on the government. The aftermath of the conspiracy also affected Florence's external relations. Pope Sixtus IV, implicated in the plot, excommunicated Lorenzo and placed Florence under interdict. In response, Lorenzo undertook a daring diplomatic mission to Naples, negotiating directly with King Ferdinand I. His personal diplomacy succeeded in de-escalating the conflict, once again illustrating his skill in navigating the treacherous waters of Italian politics. While Lorenzo remained a brilliant patron and political leader, his era also saw the beginning of a decline in the Medici's financial fortunes. The Medici Bank, once the most powerful in Europe, began to falter. A combination of poor management in some of the overseas branches, the difficulty of collecting debts from monarchs and nobles, and increasing political interference weakened the institution. Lorenzo, focused on politics and culture, paid less attention to the bank's operations than his predecessors had. The London and Bruges branches failed, and by the time of his death, the bank was in serious decline. The loss of financial stability would have long-term consequences for the family's ability to maintain power. Despite this, Lorenzo remained beloved by many Florentines. His generosity, charm, and civic contributions had earned him admiration even from those wary of his political control. When he died in 1492 at the age of 43, it marked the end of an era. Florence had reached the height of its glory under his guidance. His death left a vacuum that would soon be filled by instability and radicalism. In the immediate aftermath of his passing, Lorenzo's son, Piero di Lorenzo de Medici, proved unequal to the task of leadership. Known as Piero the Unfortunate, He lacked his father's charisma, intelligence, and political acumen. His mishandling of Florence's affairs during the French invasion in 1494 led to the temporary expulsion of the Medici from the city. Lorenzo's legacy, however, endured. He had transformed Florence into a beacon of culture and learning, creating a model of princely rule that would influence not only Italy but the broader European Renaissance. His patronage had enabled the creation of works that would define the visual and intellectual identity of the Renaissance for centuries to come. He was more than a political figure. He was a symbol of the Renaissance itself, a man who could discuss philosophy with Ficino, appreciate the sculptural grace of Michelangelo, negotiate with kings and still compose poetry. His ability to balance the demands of power with the ideals of beauty, learning, and civic responsibility made him a unique figure in history. Though his successors would struggle to maintain his legacy, Lorenzo il Magnifico remains a defining symbol of Renaissance humanism at its most elevated and enduring. After the death of Lorenzo de Medici in 1492, Florence stood at a precipice. The city had enjoyed decades of stability and cultural flourishing under Lorenzo's guidance, but the foundations of his legacy were more fragile than they appeared. The Medici banking empire was in decline, the political structure depended heavily on personal influence, and Lorenzo's chosen successor, his eldest son Piero, lacked both the wisdom and temperament required to lead. Known to history as Piero the Unfortunate, his short tenure at the helm of Medici power proved catastrophic not only for the family but for the political balance of Italy. Piero de' Medici inherited a Florence that was technically a republic but practically governed through the informal networks and alliances established by his father. However, Piero lacked the charisma and strategic skill needed to maintain those relationships. Where Lorenzo had been thoughtful and deliberate, Piero was impulsive and arrogant. His leadership quickly alienated key allies and weakened the Medici's grip on Florence's political machinery. The broader geopolitical landscape of Italy at the time was also becoming increasingly volatile. The Italian peninsula was a patchwork of city-states, duchies, kingdoms, and papal territories, all locked in a tenuous balance of power. For decades, this balance had held, maintained by diplomacy, alliances, and the Peace of Lodi. But by the late 15th century, dynastic claims and foreign ambitions began to erode that equilibrium. France, under King Charles VIII, had a long-standing claim to the throne of Naples and was eager to press it. This ambition would ignite a chain reaction that fundamentally altered Italy's political order. In 1494, Charles VIII launched an ambitious invasion of Italy, crossing the Alps with a modern, well-equipped army. His stated aim was to claim Naples, but his march south brought him directly through Tuscany. Piero, faced with the prospect of military confrontation with the vastly superior French forces, panicked. Rather than negotiate from a position of strength or consult with Florence's political institutions, he unilaterally capitulated to Charles, surrendering key fortresses and offering lavish concessions. These actions were seen not as strategic compromises but as humiliations. The people of Florence, long proud of their city's independence and prestige, turned on Piero with fury. His perceived cowardice and betrayal led to a swift and dramatic collapse of Medici authority. A popular uprising forced Piero and his family to flee Florence, casting them into exile. The Medici palaces were sacked, and their possessions confiscated. It was a shocking reversal of fortune for a family that had once appeared unassailable. Florence, for the first time in generations, was free of Medici rule. In the wake of the Medici's expulsion, Florence experienced a radical political and spiritual upheaval. A Dominican friar named Girolamo Savonarola emerged as the dominant voice in the city. Savonarola had been preaching for years against the moral decay and corruption of both the church and the secular elites. His message resonated deeply in a city traumatized by political collapse and fearful of divine retribution. Savonarola positioned himself as a prophet and reformer, calling for a return to Christian virtue and civic purity. Under his influence, Florence reconstituted itself as a republic, but not in the mold of the Medici-dominated oligarchy. Instead, it became a kind of theocratic democracy, where laws and governance were infused with religious moralism. Savonarola encouraged the population to reject worldliness and luxury, and his followers enforced these ideals with zealous fervor. The most infamous manifestation of this new regime was the Bonfire of the Vanities, in 1497. Citizens, spurred by Savonarola's preaching, collected and burned items deemed sinful or decadent. Cosmetics, mirrors, fine clothes, musical instruments, secular books, and even paintings. It was a symbolic purging of the Renaissance ideals that the Medici had championed: humanism, individualism, and the celebration of beauty. Florence, once the cradle of artistic innovation, was now gripped by an austere and ascetic vision of society. Savonarola's rule, while initially welcomed by many, soon grew oppressive. Dissenters were silenced, and his prophetic tone became increasingly apocalyptic. He condemned the Pope, Alexander VI, and refused to submit to papal authority, leading to his excommunication. As Florence's economy suffered and foreign threats loomed, the people grew disillusioned. In 1498, a counter-revolution erupted. Savonarola was arrested, tortured, and ultimately executed in the Piazza della Signoria, the same square where his bonfires had once roared. Even with Savonarola gone, the Medici remained in exile. The Republican spirit, invigorated by his movement and by resentment of the Medici's former dominance, persisted. Florence underwent a period of experimentation with new forms of government, including broader participation and constitutional reforms. But the city also faced increasing external pressures. The French and Spanish were now entrenched in Italian affairs, and Florence found itself navigating a treacherous path between rival empires and neighboring states. Meanwhile, the Medici family, though scattered and politically impotent, did not abandon hope of reclaiming their place in Florence. They lobbied foreign courts, especially in Rome and Spain, and cultivated connections with powerful allies. The Medici's enduring wealth, even in diminished form, allowed them to remain players in the broader Italian political game. During this period, younger members of the family began to emerge. Giovanni de Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent and future Pope Leo X, was quietly preparing for a different kind of return, not through the Florentine government but through the church. The Medici recognized that temporal power could be lost, but ecclesiastical power could offer new avenues for influence. The papacy, with its enormous spiritual and political authority, became a key target for the family's ambitions. Despite occasional attempts to retake Florence by force, including failed military campaigns and conspiracies, the Medici were consistently thwarted by strong anti-Medici sentiment within the city. Many Florentines remembered the heavy-handed control the family had exercised and were determined not to allow a return to oligarchic rule. Florentine Republicans continued to defend their fragile autonomy with a blend of civic pride and political paranoia. Nevertheless, cracks began to appear in the Republican facade. Florence was increasingly dependent on foreign powers for protection, and internal divisions weakened its cohesion. As Italy descended into chaos due to the ongoing Italian wars, sparked initially by Charles VIII's invasion but continued under successive French and Spanish monarchs, Florence found itself increasingly vulnerable. The Medici, waiting patiently in exile, watched as their homeland became a pawn in greater geopolitical conflicts. Their eventual return would not be on the backs of Florentine support but through the leverage of papal and foreign intervention. But even before that return was realized, the period of their exile revealed the deep ambivalence Florence felt toward them: resentment for their control, but also recognition of their past role in ensuring stability and prosperity. This chapter in the Medici saga marks one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in European history. It illustrates the fragility of political power built on personality rather than institutions, the dangers of underestimating public sentiment, and the volatile intersection of religion and politics in an age of transformation. The exile of the Medici did not mark their end. It was a painful intermission in a longer story of resilience and reinvention. Their time in the wilderness would set the stage for a triumphant, though very different, return. The Medici family's influence extended far beyond the walls of Florence, reaching into the heart of the Catholic Church with the elevation of two of its members to the papacy during the turbulent years of the early 16th century. This phase of Medici history, marked by the papacies of Giovanni de Medici as Pope Leo X and Giulio de Medici as Pope Clement VII, was a complex blend of grandeur and catastrophe. It revealed the continued ambition of the Medici to shape European history, but also the challenges of balancing spiritual leadership with temporal power in an era of sweeping religious and political change. Giovanni de Medici, born in 1475, was the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Unlike his brother Piero, who inherited the political mantle of Florence but failed to wield it effectively, Giovanni was destined for the church from a young age. He was appointed cardinal at the age of 13, a reflection not of his religious devotion but of his family's power and connections. His early ecclesiastical career unfolded against the backdrop of Medici exile, and he spent much of his time in Rome and other centers of ecclesiastical influence, building alliances and learning the inner workings of church politics. When Pope Julius II died in 1513, the conclave elected Giovanni as his successor. He took the name Leo X, and his rise to the papacy marked a stunning return to prominence for the Medici family. Leo X was the first Medici Pope, and his election signified not just a personal triumph but a strategic victory for a family that had been expelled from Florence less than 2 decades earlier. With the papal tiara, Giovanni commanded one of the most powerful thrones in Europe, blending spiritual authority with immense political and financial resources. Leo X papacy was characterized by opulence and artistic patronage. A lover of music, literature, and the visual arts, he turned the Vatican into a center of cultural brilliance. He surrounded himself with scholars, poets, and artists, many of whom he had known since his youth in Lorenzo's Florence. Among his most significant commissions were those to Raphael, whose frescoes in the Vatican Palace became defining works of the High Renaissance. Leo also supported Michelangelo, commissioning him to continue work on the facade of the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence and to create the Medici tombs in the new sacristy. The court of Leo X was lavish almost to the point of absurdity. Banquets, theatrical performances, and public celebrations became routine under his reign. He famously declared, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." This spirit of indulgence, while reflective of Renaissance grandeur, also contributed to the financial strain on the papal treasury. The expenses of Leo's court, coupled with ambitious building projects and military campaigns, led to increased taxation and the aggressive sale of indulgences, a practice that would have far-reaching consequences. The theological fallout from Leo's financial policies was swift and severe. In 1517, Martin Luther, a German monk and theologian, published his 95 Theses, challenging the legitimacy of indulgences and, more broadly, the corruption of the Church. Leo initially dismissed Luther as a provincial nuisance, underestimating the depth of discontent brewing across Europe. But the Protestant Reformation quickly gained traction, fueled by political interests and growing resentment against Rome's perceived decadence. Leo's attempts to suppress Luther, including his excommunication in 1521, only intensified the conflict. Though Leo died in December of that year, the Reformation had already become an unstoppable force that would permanently fracture Western Christendom. Following Leo's death, the Medici influence in Rome waned briefly, but was soon revived with the papacy of Giulio de Medici, cousin to Leo and the illegitimate son of Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother, Giuliano. Giulio, who had been a close advisor to Leo, became Pope Clement VII in 1523. His election came at a time of deepening crisis for the Church in Europe more broadly. Clement's papacy would be defined not by cultural triumphs but by political miscalculations and devastating events, most notably the sack of Rome in 1527. Clement VII inherited a papacy surrounded by enemies and complicated by shifting alliances. He sought to maintain a precarious balance between the two great Catholic powers of the time, France under Francis I and the Holy Roman Empire ruled by Charles V. Initially leaning toward France, Clement misread the intentions and capabilities of the emperor, whose troops, many of them unpaid and restless, eventually marched on Rome. The result was one of the darkest days in the city's history. In May 1527, imperial forces entered Rome and unleashed a brutal sack. Churches were desecrated, civilians were massacred, and the treasures of the Renaissance were looted. Clement VII was forced to flee to the Castel Sant'Angelo, where he remained under siege for weeks. The Pope, once the most powerful man in Christendom, was now a prisoner in his own city, and the authority of the papacy lay in tatters. This catastrophe was not only a humiliation for the Medici but a profound turning point in European history. The sack of Rome signaled the end of the High Renaissance and marked the beginning of a more somber, restrained era in art and culture. Politically, it demonstrated the vulnerability of the papacy in the face of emergent nation-states and imperial ambition. Spiritually, it compounded the moral and institutional crisis sparked by the Reformation. Clement's reputation never recovered, and his authority was severely diminished. While Rome suffered, Florence too was caught in the crosshairs of Clement's ambitions. Determined to reassert Medici rule in the city that had expelled them decades earlier, Clement supported a campaign to reinstate his family by force. In 1529, with the support of Charles V, who had since made peace with the papacy, Clement sent imperial troops to besiege Florence. The city, determined to defend its republican government, resisted fiercely. For nearly a year Florence held out, but in August 1530 it fell. The Republic was dismantled, and Medici rule was restored under the guise of princely governance. This time, the Medici did not bother with the trappings of republicanism. Alessandro de' Medici, widely believed to be the illegitimate son of Clement VII, was installed as Duke of Florence, marking the transformation of the city from a republic to a hereditary principality. The Medici had returned not as civic leaders but as sovereign rulers, backed by imperial might and papal blessing. The legacy of the Medici Popes is a complex blend of artistic splendor and political turmoil. Leo X presided over a golden age of Renaissance culture but failed to address the spiritual needs of a rapidly changing world. His extravagant patronage left a lasting mark on the visual and intellectual heritage of the Church, with artists like Raphael and Michelangelo producing some of their greatest works under his commission. The Vatican, enriched and embellished during this period, remains a monument to this artistic flowering. Under Clement VII, the family's legacy became more entangled with the disasters of history. His failure to navigate the power politics of Europe, his mishandling of the Reformation, and his role in the sack of Rome overshadowed his contributions. Yet even in this troubled time, the Medici continued to support cultural institutions, including the expansion of the Vatican Library and the development of the Medici Library in Florence. These repositories of knowledge became vital centers of scholarship, preserving the intellectual heritage of antiquity and the Renaissance for future generations. The Medici Popes epitomized the contradictions of their time: humanist patrons who presided over a church increasingly out of step with its flock, political leaders who misread the tides of history, and cultural visionaries who were unable to forestall the fractures shaking the foundations of their world. Their papacies reflect both the heights of Renaissance achievement and the cracks that would eventually widen into schism. The Medici's foray into the papacy extended the family's influence in ways that the founders of the dynasty could scarcely have imagined. They not only ruled a city but helped shape the course of Europe's religious, artistic, and political transformation. Their legacy, stained by failure and bloodshed, nonetheless carries the grandeur of a family that, for a time, stood at the very heart of Western civilization. Following the tumultuous period of the Medici papacy, the family's influence transitioned from ecclesiastical power back to secular rule, culminating in the establishment of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. This era, spanning from Cosimo I's ascension in 1537 to the death of John Gaston in 1737, witnessed the Medici's transformation from Florentine rulers to European sovereigns. Their reign was marked by significant cultural patronage, scientific advancement, and political maneuvering, yet it also foreshadowed the eventual decline of their dynasty. Cosimo I de' Medici, born in 1519, emerged from a junior branch of the Medici family. Following the assassination of Duke Alessandro de' Medici in 1537, the 17-year-old Cosimo was unexpectedly chosen as his successor. Initially perceived as a pliable figurehead, Cosimo swiftly consolidated power, defeating opposition at the Battle of Montemerlo and asserting his authority over Florence. His reign marked a departure from the republican traditions of the city, as he centralized governance and diminished the influence of rival factions. Cosimo's ambitions extended beyond Florence. He pursued the unification of Tuscany, most notably through the conquest of Siena in 1555, which effectively brought the region under his control. In recognition of his achievements, Pope Pius V granted him the title of Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1569, elevating the Medici's status among European nobility. This new title not only solidified Cosimo's authority but also signified the transformation of Florence from a city-state to a centralized state. Under Cosimo's rule, Florence experienced a cultural renaissance. He commissioned the construction of the Uffizi, originally intended as administrative offices, which later became one of the world's most renowned art galleries. Cosimo also expanded the Pitti Palace and developed the Boboli Gardens, showcasing his commitment to architectural and artistic excellence. His patronage extended to artists like Giorgio Vasari and Benvenuto Cellini, reinforcing Florence's reputation as a hub of Renaissance art. Cosimo's successors continued his legacy of cultural and scientific patronage. Francesco I, his son, was deeply interested in alchemy and the natural sciences. He established the Studiolo in the Palazzo Vecchio, a private chamber adorned with artworks and scientific instruments, reflecting his intellectual pursuits. Francesco's fascination with alchemy was emblematic of the era's blending of science and mysticism. Ferdinando I, Francesco's brother, assumed the Grand Ducal title after Francesco's death. A former cardinal, Ferdinando brought a pragmatic approach to governance. He invested in infrastructure, improving the Tuscan economy through the development of ports and the promotion of trade. Ferdinando also supported scientific endeavors, acquiring instruments and fostering an environment conducive to intellectual growth. Cosimo II, Ferdinando's son, is perhaps best remembered for his patronage of Galileo Galilei. Galileo, who had been Cosimo's tutor, was appointed as the court mathematician and philosopher. Under Cosimo's auspices, Galileo conducted groundbreaking astronomical research, including the discovery of Jupiter's moons, which he named the Medicean stars in honor of his patrons. This relationship exemplified the Medici's role in advancing scientific knowledge during the Renaissance. Despite these achievements, the later Medici Grand Dukes presided over a period of decline. Cosimo III, who reigned from 1670 to 1723, was characterized by his devout religiosity and conservative policies. His reign saw increased censorship and a retreat from the progressive ideals that had previously defined the Medici court. Economic stagnation and political isolation further eroded Tuscany's prominence. John Gaston, Cosimo III's son, was the last Medici Grand Duke. His reign was marked by personal struggles and a lack of political engagement. Without a male heir, the Medici dynasty came to an end upon his death in 1737. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany was subsequently transferred to the House of Lorraine, signaling the conclusion of Medici rule. The Medici Grand Dukes left an indelible mark on Tuscany's cultural and scientific landscape. Their patronage fostered an environment where art and inquiry thrived, contributing to the broader Renaissance movement. However, their later years underscore the challenges of dynastic succession and the perils of political complacency. The Medici legacy serves as a testament to the heights of human achievement and the inevitability of change in the face of time. The Medici family, renowned for their patronage, played a pivotal role in shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape of the Renaissance. Their support for the arts, architecture, and humanist thought not only transformed Florence but also left an indelible mark on European history. In Florence, the Medici's influence is evident in the city's architectural marvels. They commissioned the completion of the Florence Cathedral's dome, a feat achieved by Filippo Brunelleschi, which became a symbol of Renaissance ingenuity. The Medici chapels, particularly the Sagrestia Nuova designed by Michelangelo, serve as both mausoleums and masterpieces, reflecting the family's dedication to art and legacy. The Uffizi Gallery, initially constructed as administrative offices, evolved into one of the world's most renowned art museums, housing works by Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael. These structures not only enhanced Florence's skyline but also solidified its status as a cultural epicenter. Beyond architecture, the Medici were instrumental in fostering the Renaissance's intellectual revival. They supported scholars who championed humanism, emphasizing the study of classical texts and the potential of human achievement. Figures like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola thrived under Medici patronage, translating and interpreting ancient works that had long been neglected. This revival of classical learning laid the groundwork for advancements in various fields, from philosophy to science. The Medici's commitment to knowledge extended to the sciences. They established institutions and funded research that propelled scientific inquiry forward. Notably, Galileo Galilei received support from the Medici, dedicating his discoveries to them and benefiting from their protection during times of controversy. Their patronage created an environment where innovation could flourish, bridging the gap between art and science. The Medici's influence was not confined to Florence. Through strategic marriages and alliances, they extended their reach across Europe. Catherine de' Medici became Queen of France, and the family's connections influenced political and cultural developments beyond Italy. Their legacy persisted through these ties, embedding Medici ideals into the fabric of European society. In modern times, the Medici mythos continues to captivate. Their story has been depicted in literature, film, and television, symbolizing the intersection of power, art, and intellect. Florence remains a testament to their vision, with countless tourists drawn to the city's Medici-sponsored landmarks. Their enduring legacy serves as a reminder of the profound impact that visionary patronage can have on culture and history. Medici dynasty is a poignant tale of decline, personal tribulations, and a profound commitment to cultural preservation. As the once mighty family approached its end, the actions of its last members ensured that their legacy would endure, particularly through the safeguarding of Florence's artistic treasures. John Gaston de' Medici, the last Grand Duke of Tuscany from the Medici line, ascended to the throne in 1723. His reign was marked by personal struggles and a lack of effective governance. Described as melancholic and reclusive, John Gaston often withdrew from public life, spending his final years in seclusion, accompanied by a circle of young companions known as the Ruspanti. His detachment from state affairs contributed to the weakening of Medici authority and the decline of Tuscany's political influence. The absence of a direct heir became a pressing concern. John Gaston's marriage to Anna Maria Francisca of Saxe-Lauenburg was childless and fraught with discord. As the likelihood of a Medici successor diminished, European powers began deliberating the future of Tuscany. In 1718, prior to John Gaston's accession, an agreement among major European nations designated Charles of Spain as the heir to the Tuscan throne, sidelining Medici claims. This decision underscored the diminishing influence of the Medici family on the international stage. Amid this backdrop, Anna Maria Luisa de Medici, John Gaston's sister and the last surviving member of the family, took decisive action to preserve the Medici legacy. Recognizing the cultural wealth amassed by her ancestors, she orchestrated the family pact, Patto di Famiglia, in 1737. This agreement stipulated that the extensive Medici art collections and estates would remain in Florence, serving the public and attracting visitors. By ensuring that these treasures were not dispersed or removed, Anna Maria Luisa safeguarded the city's artistic heritage for future generations. John Gaston's death in 1737 marked the end of Medici rule. With no direct heirs, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany was transferred to Francis Stephen of Lorraine, who was married to Maria Theresa of Austria. This transition initiated the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty's control over Tuscany, as determined by prior European agreements. Although the Medici lineage had concluded, their cultural contributions continued to shape Florence's identity. Anna Maria Luisa de Medici passed away in 1743, her efforts having ensured that the family's artistic legacy remained intact. The preservation of Florence's cultural assets, including masterpieces housed in institutions like the Uffizi Gallery, stands as a testament to her foresight. The Medici family's influence, though no longer political, endures through the art, architecture and cultural institutions they nurtured. In reflecting on the Medici's final years, one observes a dynasty that, despite its decline, remained committed to the enrichment of society. Their patronage of the arts and dedication to cultural preservation have left an indelible mark on Florence and the broader world. The Medici story serves as a reminder of the enduring power of cultural legacy, transcending the temporal bounds of political dominion. The Medici family stands as one of the most remarkable dynasties in world history, not merely because of the vast power and wealth they accumulated, but due to the profound and lasting influence they wielded over politics, culture, and society during the Renaissance and beyond. Their story is a complex tapestry of ambition, ingenuity, art patronage and political maneuvering that shaped the course of European history. Reflecting on their journey reveals the intricate interplay between power and culture and offers timeless lessons about leadership, legacy, and the forces that sustain or dismantle dynasties. At the core of the Medici story is their extraordinary ability to fuse economic success with political influence. Originating from modest merchant beginnings in Florence, the family rose through the ranks by mastering commerce and banking at a time when Florence was a thriving center of trade and finance. Their Medici Bank became one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe, securing the family's position as indispensable players in the complex world of Renaissance politics. This economic base provided not just wealth but also leverage that the Medici skillfully transformed into political power, often wielded behind the scenes through subtle manipulation rather than overt authority. Yet, what truly set the Medici apart was their unparalleled role as patrons of the arts and humanist thought. They understood early on that cultural patronage was a potent form of soft power, enhancing their prestige and legitimacy. The Medici sponsored legendary artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, and Raphael, as well as architects like Brunelleschi, whose works redefined artistic expression and urban landscapes. Their investments in art and architecture not only glorified Florence but also symbolized the family's enlightened leadership and vision. The construction of iconic landmarks such as the Florence Cathedral Dome, the Medici Chapels, and the Uffizi Gallery served as enduring monuments to their cultural influence. Moreover, the Medici were champions of the Renaissance humanism movement, which emphasized the revival of classical learning and the potential for human achievement. They supported scholars, philosophers, and scientists who advanced knowledge in myriad fields, fostering an environment where art and science flourished side by side. Galileo's association with the Medici court exemplifies their role in promoting scientific inquiry, reflecting their forward-thinking patronage that extended beyond mere aesthetics into intellectual progress. However, the Medici story is not only one of ascent and triumph but also a cautionary tale of the vulnerabilities inherent in dynastic power. Their rise was marked by shrewd political strategy, but their fall was precipitated by a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures. As the family grew complacent, financial troubles in their banking enterprise emerged, undermining their economic foundation. Political miscalculations such as those leading to the Puzzi conspiracy and later the French invasions, eroded their control. The family's grip on power weakened as Republican sentiments surged and opposition forces, fueled by figures like Savonarola, challenged Medici dominance. The final Medici rulers, including John Gaston, struggled with personal issues and lacked the political acumen of their predecessors. Without heirs to continue the lineage, the dynasty came to an end in the mid-18th century, with Tuscany passing to other European houses. Yet even in decline, the Medici's commitment to cultural preservation endured. Anna Maria Luisa's family pact ensured that the Medici art collections and estates remained in Florence, cementing the family's legacy in the city's identity and cultural heritage. Their story encapsulates a unique combination of power, patronage, and politics, an intertwining that created a template for Renaissance rulership and left a deep imprint on Western civilization. The Medici demonstrated how cultural investment could legitimize political authority and how control of economic resources underpinned political influence. They also illustrated the precariousness of dynastic power, vulnerable to shifts in fortune, leadership, and public sentiment. In the modern imagination, the Medici have become emblematic of the Renaissance itself, a period of extraordinary creativity and transformation. Their name conjures images of artistic masterpieces, political intrigue, and the birth of modernity. Countless books, films, and academic studies have explored their multifaceted legacy, reflecting enduring fascination with their complex narrative. The Medici family's impact transcends their historical epoch. Their story teaches us about the enduring relationship between culture and power, the importance of visionary leadership, and the consequences of unchecked ambition. They remain a symbol of how art and intellect can elevate a family from mere wealth to a legacy that shapes the world for centuries to come.